Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on this Tuesday afternoon. The week's flying already. I'm in Sydney, quite a nice day or afternoon outside, blue sky. And today I'd like to welcome a very special guest, Jeff Sparrow. Welcome to you, Jeff.
Hey, how are you?
And Jeff, you're from Sydney?
I'm from Melbourne originally, but I'm staying in Sydney at the moment, yeah.
You're staying in Sydney at the moment. And, of course, Jeff and I met face-to-face after I followed him a long time through his articles. We met at the Greens Reboot Day about a month ago, where you were one of the keynote speakers. I thought that was a really good day, actually.
It was a nice discussion, a nice bunch of people.
Nice bunch of people, nice day, in Chippendale or Redfern, actually, I think. So, Jeff, just a little bit about you first. Of course, most of us will know you through your articles in The Guardian, but you call yourself on Twitter, and I really also enjoy following your tweets. You call yourself a writer, an author and a broadcaster.
Yes, I do. Until recently I was on The Breakfast Show in 3RRR in Melbourne, so that was my day job. I used to be the editor for Overland Literary Journal for quite some time, so that was a previous incarnation. And as well as writing for The Guardian, I do a lot of freelance writing, and then I write books of non-fiction. So
yes, and doing a bit of, of course, as I said, I knew you from your very good articles in The Guardian and your terrific presence on Twitter. But when I was doing a bit of research in preparation for our chat today, you're actually really prolific in your writing. You've got a book coming out in November.
Yep.
I also saw that you've recently wrote a book review about neoliberalism. And your special topics seem to be climate change, but what I notice, the underlying theme is really sort of justice. Would you say that that's fair?
Yeah, I was an activist for a long time before I became a writer, and so I started writing as a sort of outgrowth of my political stuff. So I've always been interested in Australian history and politics, and I'm not someone who was specifically from an environmental background, but I think climate change now is just such an overwhelming preoccupation for so many of us. And like a lot of people, I've had to sort of do a crash course on trying to get up to speed with climate politics. It seems to me now that the climate crisis, which is obviously a subset of a much broader environmental crisis, is in many ways the most significant form of capitalist crisis in the world today. It is, it is the form in which the sort of the breakdown of the existing order is happening now. And I think in some ways it's the issue that defines this generation. So that's become something of a preoccupation, not particularly because it was something I was interested in, but I think it's just sort of forced on us now. You can't really be a political person these days without coming to terms with climate change because it's just so significant.
And talk about defining generations. Having attended the climate strike in Sydney on Friday, were you there?
Yes, I was. Yes, it was amazing.
Just an amazing feeling. I would actually say that it's across the generations. I was really struck by the huge diversity of the crowd in age and every other kind of diversity. Whereas some have tried to characterise it as a young person's strike, it really was very across the age divide, I thought. What was your feeling about the climate strike on Friday? And not only in here in Australia, but around the world.
I agree with you. I think that generational explanations for politics are always bullshit. That politics isn't defined by generations. There are some young people who are very conservative. There are some older people who are very radical. Pushing this as a revolt of the young against the old is not particularly helpful, not least because it obscures the political questions that we have to deal with, which aren't simply to do with when you were born. That being said, it was really inspiring that there were so many young people on stage, and I think that the high school students who led that walkout and the previous ones have played a really inspiring role. I think a lot of people were, starting to give up hope about climate change. There's a sort of sense of this slow motion, car crash that's taking place. We all know what's coming. The warnings get clearer and clearer, and yet we seem incapable of doing anything about it. I think I said in a piece I wrote recently for The Guardian that there's a sort of nightmarish quality to it in an almost literal sense. There's that feeling you have when you're in a dream where you know that something terrible is going to happen, but you're incapable of moving. And I think climate change has seemed like that to lots of people. We all want to do something and we don't know what to do. And so seeing such huge numbers of people mobilizing, I think was really liberating for lots of people. And it kind of showed that, we can do something, and this is an issue that has a massive resonance. I mean, those were huge demonstrations. Most likely, almost certainly, I think the largest environmental demonstrations Australia has ever seen, and up there with some of the biggest demonstrations in international history. So I think that's tremendously hopeful. I should maybe put this on Twitter, shouldn't I? Have you?
Yes, if you'd like to.
Yeah.
And Kim, would you mind? Kim, I think is watching us. Kim, would you mind tweeting as well? But yes, by all means, give us a vote. And I'll say welcome to everyone who's watching us live, and of course those of us who watch later in replay. And for those that are watching us live, feel free to make a comment or throw in a question, and we'll certainly aim to get to those. But yes, I really came away actually with feeling very empowered, with a real glimpse of, real feeling of hope after a pretty hopeless time in our political landscape. And you're right, it was so encouraging to see those young people speaking so well and so passionately about an issue that is clearly impacting not just the current, us currently, but as has been said, is going to be such a big part of their lives. And the frustration at our politicians and their complete inaction. Of course, being in the industry and doing the work that I do, I very much noticed that conservative media also copped quite a few mentions. And it has been interesting to monitor their reaction to the strikes. I suppose now the question is, are the politicians going to act, or is it going to be same?
Yeah, that's one of the most striking aspects of this crisis, isn't it? The complete abdication of the political class. So, we saw during the day of the climate strike the reaction of the coalition policy, the politicians in the coalition, were essentially to snark and to mock the demonstrators who were acting in accordance with the best available science. So we have, a government that's just saying we don't care about science anymore. Science is indifferent to us. Actually, we think it's funny that, people are terrified about the natural world falling apart all over them. So we had, liberal politicians snarking about it on Twitter as if this was the funniest thing on the world. And then an almost complete abdication by the Labor Party as well. I know I was trying to find out which Labor Party figures had been involved. I know there were some attending in a private capacity, but Albanese couldn't stir himself to say anything about the climate strike. Didn't attend. Penny Wong wasn't there as far as I could see. Plibersek wasn't there. So the entire Labor Party front bench was just, AWOL on this defining issue of a generation. And, what does it say about the party of opposition that you have hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of Melbourne and Sydney, and the supposed opposition party has nothing to say? Nothing. They don't tell us, do they support the demonstration? Do they oppose the demonstration? They are just silent. It's extraordinary. And it's not as if this is an issue that you can be indifferent about. It's not like it's some sort of minor question that we can just, agree to disagree about. We have, the entire scientific community saying that we are facing the utter breakdown of the natural world, not just climate change, but, mass extinctions, deforestation, a complete degradation of our waterways. All of these things are taking place all around us, and the Labor Party's got nothing to say. So, no wonder people are taking to the streets. I mean, I wrote a piece about this some time back where I said that essentially the political class as a whole, the official parties in the left and the left and the right, have said more or less overtly they are going to do nothing about climate change. The Federal Labor Party cannot even bring themselves to condemn the Queensland Labor Party as it goes full steam ahead to open up the Adani mine. And so in that case where you have the major parties of government totally committed to, the bipartisan destruction of the environment, what else can people do than take to the streets? I mean, if there's going to be any resolution to this crisis, it's going to take place through the construction of a social movement, of the scale of that we saw in the 60s and 70s. And that, I think, is where whatever hope there is lies.
Certainly Morrison came in there was a lot of comments about him. Adani was another big topic that was mentioned in the strike as well. I thought it was quite noteworthy that 2 unions spoke on the stage.
It's very encouraging.
Very encouraging indeed, and certainly the CFMEU had big flags there. I think it was the MUA was the other union
there as well. So 2 of the most powerful unions in the country, and it helps break down this argument that Conservatives make that the environment is somehow a middle class issue that's irrelevant to working class people. And of course, this is a nonsense argument. In the breakdown of nature is going to affect working class people more than it will affect the wealthy. It's the people who have got the least who will be affected the most by this. But, I guess the challenge for the left is to present an alternative to climate change that allows people who are dependent on working in extractive industries opportunities to find, sustainable jobs. But even then, I don't think this is nearly the challenge that it's sometimes presented as being. I mean, in the election, when in the discussion about Adani, before the election and indeed afterwards, when you saw interviews with working class people in some of those mining towns that were being discussed as voting in large numbers for the coalition because of the Adani issue, one of the things that came across really clearly is these were not people who were saying the mining industry has provided us with a great life and everything is fine in these small towns. What they were saying is these towns are falling apart. There is no work. My future is fucked. And at least Adani will be better than nothing. And that seems to me a tremendous opportunity for the left if we can provide people with something better. And it shouldn't be hard to do. It shouldn't be difficult to provide people with something better than, having to take these tiny number of jobs in a dodgy mine project simply because there is nothing better available. And again, I think it was a tremendous failure of the Labor Party in that election. That was the necessary consequence of their prevarication on Adani, because the Labor Party couldn't give a straight answer as to whether they would close Adani or not. They weren't in a position to be able to tell people what the alternative to Adani was going to be. If you had said, well, yes, we are committed to making sure Adani wasn't going to happen, you would then be able to say, and here are the sorts of jobs that we're going to be providing. Here is the sort of the funding package we're offering for jobs in renewable. But because they just tried to have it both ways, they were then able to be wedged by the Liberal Party on the basis that they don't care about working class jobs. So, I agree with you. I mean, seeing those trade unions on the march was tremendously hopeful. And I think that's something we really have to build, to raise the slogan of a sort of sustainable transition and, to start talking about what is going to be the alternative to the extractive industries, because we can't simply go on like this.
And certainly the 3 things that demands isn't really right, but the three things that the protesters are asking for was the transition to 100% renewables by 2030. They're also saying no new thermal coal mines. And the third part, which I thought was really good, the third part of those requests is also jobs transitions for those working in the mining sector. So it's very much on their mind in terms of their protests and in terms of their calling out on this issue, is that those jobs, it is often raised as a concern in those mining districts, they want to be able to give people involved in that and impacted by that a transition to another industry. So that has been covered by the protests for sure. Coming back to what you were saying about the Labor Party, I saw Andrew Leigh and Mark Dreyfus.
Yes.
Just from recollection, they were certainly tweeting about the marches and saying it was a good thing. I think Mark Butler possibly also. But yes, Albo didn't say anything. I think he sort of tweeted possibly on Saturday night about the football, which, you know, it just really sends the Twitter community spare. To say the least, because we need more substance than that in these really extraordinary times, to say the least. But I agree with you, Jeff. All we're asking is that the politicians and industry and so on just follow the economic evidence, the scientific evidence, no more than that.
Yeah,
it doesn't seem too much to ask, does it?
Well, no, that's right. I mean, to paraphrase an old saying, you know, you might not be interested in climate, but climate is interested. Your dog just walked past in the background.
Yeah, we are completely live, and I am at home. And
yeah, you might. I mean, you know, politicians might not be interested in climate, but the climate is interested in everyone. I mean, if you know, it doesn't matter whether they want to be involved in this. These things are happening. The environment is breaking down all around us, and you know, there's not going to be much mercy for people who put their heads in the sands. I mean, it's not something that can be evaded or put off anymore. It's not an issue for the future. It's an issue that's happening right now. And it's extraordinary that Albo is tweeting about the fucking football when, you know, there is a climate strike involving hundreds of thousands of people. It's shameful.
And of course, this is the point there that we go, well, you know, it's Liberal policy. Why are you blaming Labor? I think that our expectations for the Liberal and National parties, and indeed the other, you know, their other supporting parties, One Nation and so on, that's very established. Our expectations for the more progressive part, so the Labor Party, is higher. And so far, we're not seeing them stepping up to the plate. We're seeing talk about their climate change credentials, but what I'm not seeing is too much walk. So as you said, they were a bit both sides of the fence on Adani. I heard them, you know, talk about sovereign risk, which I think was an issue. But I did see them say that they would strengthen environmental laws, which kind of wiped out Adani, but then they brought in the Beetaloo Basin. So that's what, before the election. So again, their climate change credentials were somewhat undermined by some of those actions. Again, all we want is evidence-based policy. Check the science, check the economic facts, everything else falls into place. Out of interest, do you think that it's the reason that they're doing this? Do you think it's donor influence?
I only think it's a bunch of things. I mean, clearly they've drawn all of the wrong lessons from the federal election. But just to go back to the point that you were just making there. I mean, people ask, well, why? You know, why do those of us on the left attack the Labor Party on this? Well, it's not